Okay, we are back. Ed Carbajal and Matt Hawkins here with the Coast to Coast Combat Hour, brought to you by AllAccessMMA.com. Make sure you check out AllAccessMMA.com for your mixed martial arts news. We're coming to you after Bellator 290 and leading up to the one of the best marketed cards by the UFC 284. Matt, you were in house at Bellator 290. I mean, we might as well look back at the closing of one of the best heavyweights in mixed martial arts ever's final fight. How was it, man?
Uh, I was glad I was there. Um, I had to be there, and it worked out to with all the legends and stuff in the cage at the very end.
Mm.
Um, Obviously the outcome wasn't what I was hoping for, or most old school MMA fans were hoping for, or probably most MMA fans in general that
Mm.
aren't Zuffa zombies or former Zuffa zombies or whatever we're calling
Mm.
them these days. Um, I wasn't surprised. My heart wanted Fedor to win, but the minute he came out and his hands were down at his
Mm.
hips, it became clear to me that this was going to be a replay essentially of the first fight, and it was just going to be as minute Bader landed, and
Mm.
and then we got the typical Herb Dean allowing him to get hit in the back of the head about a half a dozen times. Um, Not that that would have made a difference. It
No.
wasn't a fight changing thing. It was just kind of a frustrating thing to be like, and see the replays in the afterwards. You're kind of like, well, he kind of let him get away with, a good half dozen hammer fist kind of the back of the head, punch to the
Yeah.
back of the head. Um, but no excuses. For those fans listening, I was on the Living Death podcast with Ant Walker and Ben Duffy and Jay Petrie on Monday, and we got kind of into it a lot. But I just I felt like they a couple of them were commenting how they felt like it was sadder than the first time Bader beat him, and for me it wasn't. For me it was more of it was a conclusion. The Bader one, you knew Fader was going to come back, and you were kind of just disappointed. It was the end of a tournament. It was kind of a huge letdown. Whereas this one wasn't like I didn't have the belief necessarily that he was going to be able to pull off the big victory, and then to have the conclusion at the end kind of I kind of, it sounds weird, but I kind of compared it to like a funeral of somebody who passes, but they lived to be 100 years old and like lived a really good life. Like he
Mm-hmm.
had a great career. Like there's nothing really to be sad about. Sure, the ending is ugly, but it's been ugly for every other fighter that we've ever
Yep.
seen or loved in this sport. So
Yeah.
to me, to have all the other fighters in the cage and be putting their arm around him, and it kind of be like, okay, you're with us now. You're part of the club. You were always kind of the president of the club, but now you're just a peasant. You're with us again now, and now we're just this group of the golden era of MMA. It's a couple of the guys are the pioneers. You had Hoist and stuff out there, and even Henzo goes into the mid 90s, but for the most part, it was the 2000 to 2015 to up till to just to last weekend, with Shogun and stuff
Mm-hmm.
era of fighters. So was I, I wasn't I mean, I wasn't happy, but at the same time, like there was kind of a piece of like, okay, like I'm here, I get to see this. He has everybody around him that really praised him his whole career, guys he fought, guys he wanted to fight, guys who wanted to fight him. And although I wasn't happy necessarily with the way Bellator did it, I thought that Ariel Hawani actually gave Coker the blueprint on doing it at the beginning of the show.
Mm-hmm.
As far as them for that photo opportunity, I think that was the way to go. It sounded like Coker was on board with that, and then kind of they just didn't do it. I'm sure CBS and Showtime or whoever
Yeah.
have their say in how all that goes, but um, you know, uh, like you said when you started this, the end of a career of one of the greatest of all times. And I said it on the show earlier this week, like whether you have him number one, whether you have him number three, or whether you have him number 25, none of that matters.
Mm-hmm.
There's been thousands and thousands of MMA fighters, and he was one of the greatest. And for a 7-8 year run, he was the pound for pound number one fighter in the world
Mm-hmm.
as a heavyweight. We don't see that anymore. You just don't. He's the only one really. I don't know if anybody. Maybe Lesnar got there for like a weekend, but I think that was all the Anderson Silva and George St. Pierre time that kind of overlapped him.
Hmm.
And then you had John Jones, who in theory, I guess, if he wins the heavyweight title, could creep into that position. Um, Depending on the Volkanovski Islam fight that we're going to get into and stuff, but. Um, I just, it was a level of sadness for me. The only level of sadness for me is that Fedor's the one guy up until this past weekend that I could watch. He was the last one that gave me that feeling like when I first started watching MMA. And I think fans, if you're really hardcore into the sport, you should know what that means in that sense that like your legs kind of shake, you get a little tight in the chest a little bit,
Hmm.
you're nervous, it's that feeling that you sweat a little bit, like it's what really made me sit down and watch pay-per-views for 25 years on a Friday night when everything
Yeah.
else was going out, and I was like, I know I have to see what Dan Henderson's going to do. I got to see what Randy Couture is going to do. I got
Yeah.
Kevin Randleman's going to do.
Yeah. All those guys that were standing there were those guys. Yeah.
And Fedor was the last one, and the one that
Hmm.
gave me that live experience that that brought my friends together, like, and when he, especially when he was undefeated through like the Affliction era and stuff,
Yeah.
and they were luckily where I live, I was able to have local events by me where he was successful.
Yeah. Not
But,
everybody could see him. Yeah, you're right. I mean,
so it,
I
it
had to wait for the ban to get lifted here to even. I mean, thankfully, I was here. I was able to be here to cover one of his fights when he fought Chael Sonnen here in the Garden. But it's definitely, like you said, it was there's that photo. Everyone shared that photo um of all the legends that came to wish him well in his retirement. But it's symbolic of like that's. I mean, I've said it before about, especially in the last year, the guard has changed so much in MMA, and that's kind of like this was kind of like the ultimate guard change. But one, you know, people like to shit on Bellator, and I know you said that you guys did a lot on the Living Death thing, which by the way, the link to that is in the description for folks that missed it and want to see it, because we know those guys over there at the Living Death podcast. That's part of the roundtable here of old school MMA fans, but and media. But the the thing about this particular guard change is like you look at a difference between Fedor fighting his last fight and making it be known beforehand, and Glover Teixeira doing the same thing. And you look at the send off that he got fighting for Bellator versus you know Glover, Anderson Silva, anybody that did their last fight in the UFC. It's almost like, okay, yeah, you get your moment, you put your gloves down in the cage, and now you can fuck off so we can make money off the next young guy. Whereas like Scott Coker made it a point to get all these guys in there, and if you watch the post fight press conference, a lot of those dudes called him first and said they wanted to be there. You know, we just don't. You don't see that in the UFC, and I don't think you're going to see that anywhere else. I mean, now that Coker did it, you'll probably see other people try to copy it, but that just goes to show you his love for martial arts and the martial arts way. He mentioned Bushido in the post fight press conference, like how Fader is kind of like an embodiment of that in mixed martial arts, and that's why his retirement was so symbolic. But um, you're you know, it's not a company going through the motions thing over there. They actually care about martial arts and the fighters and stuff like that. So I thought it was really cool. And I know that photo's been. I'm gonna feature that photo in my newsletter for folks that haven't seen it. Excuse me, I'm getting over COVID, so sorry if I sound like an old man.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. And none of our comments on that other show were had anything to do with the way and the respect that Bellator has for its fighters and for the legends of the sport. It was more some of the behind the scenes thing. Just for our listeners, if they don't catch that show, like for one example was like the posters and T-shirts were basically sold out within
Mm.
5 minutes of the doors opening up,
Holy shit! Wow.
and not because there was thousands of them to sell, because they didn't have really any.
Mm.
um so it was kind of that kind of thing. I opening the gate with Caldwell. and
Mhm.
eventually getting Gracie to the post limbs, and kind of flying through the Alejandro Lara's and the
Mhm.
Albrechtson's Neil fight, and it just felt like it was such a quick whirlwind right out the gate that it felt to me a little bit like it took away from the fact that it was such a stacked card.
Yeah.
Because and I for TV I get it. For TV or YouTube, it's awesome because they're flying through the fights. But for the
Yeah.
live experience, when you got that ramp and you got
Mhm.
the fire, you got the lighting and all that stuff, to kind of just run dudes down the ramp and do it, to me it took away from a little bit of the shine that some of those fights should have had. So
Yeah.
that was some of the criticism. Some of the
Yeah.
ticket stuff was a little bit, fans can listen to
Mhm.
that. That was for future events and stuff. Some of their ticket sales process they're going through right
Mm.
now seems odd to me as somebody who buys a lot of tickets. But overall, I thought the fights were entertaining.
Mm.
It was
But
a fair.
really quick, just
Go
to
ahead.
get back to Fedor and the walls, because there's people that don't understand why he's as good, uh, well respected and admired by folks like you and I and folks that have been following this sport for a long time. So, shout out to Scott Fontana over at the New York Post. I want to share a tweet because he likes to keep his own numbers and data for certain things. So I want to share this tweet that he posted to understand why Fedor is ranked, and he put it under a quote of Dana White when of course Dana White took his moment to shit on Fedor, but I want to share this tweet here from Scott Fontana. Per my running tally from Fight Matrix generated historical rankings, Fedor is 4-1 against top 5 at the time opponents, 13-4 against the top 10, 15-6 against the top 15 of all time, and several UFC Hall of Famers are in there. If you don't follow Scott Fontana, again he's at the New York Post and he covers combat sports for them, but he does a lot of interesting tweets like that, and I feel like him putting those numbers out there should kind of like help the TikTok fan base that the UFC is aiming for now, kind of like see why he's considered as good as he is. Dana White's just sour grapes because he never got him. But I mean, if you look at who was in the cage in there with him, I mean, again, those were all former UFC guys. I mean, I wrote a top 5 fight thing over at My MMA News that I couldn't talk when I had COVID the week of his final fight. So all I could do was write, and I wrote that article. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But I listed 5 fights. One of those fights was when he fought Andrei Arlovsky at Affliction. Arlovsky was like a top. What was he?
Number two.
Yeah, at the
Number
time.
2 in the world. I've actually went into it with a few guys on Twitter over the last week or so. Some guys I've picked just to kind of
Mm-hmm.
go after because they run their mouth and they say stupid stuff. Yeah, one of them was pointing out that we shouldn't count Arlovsky and Tim Sylvia's fights because they were washed at the time. And I had to, the one cool thing about the internet is
Arlovsky wasn't washed. Yeah.
he was on a long fight winning streak. But
Yeah.
one of the cool things about the internet is it never disappears
Mm-hmm.
when stuff's posted. So Sherdog and our boys over there, you can archive the rankings. So if you
Mm-hmm.
Google 2008 May 2008 rankings, and at that time, for fans that don't know, Sherdog was the official rankings for MMA. There was no other real ranking company. They were maybe MMA Weekly, maybe MMA Junkie if it might have had some
No,
stuff,
yeah,
but
everybody
Sherdog
was yeah,
Sherdog was it.
yeah,
Even the UFC acknowledged Sherdog's rankings.
and
Um,
ESPN, yeah.
in May of 2002, weeks before he fought Tim Sylvia. Tim Sylvia was the 4th ranked heavyweight in the world. Number 2 was Nogueira, that Fedor had already beaten twice, and number 3 was Randy Couture, who was in litigation with the UFC to fight Fedor.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no other fight. The other fighters listed were Verdun was like 6, who couldn't go, was a 500 fighter in Pride, could never work his way there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and Ben Rothwell was 10. So because it came off of some guy going, well, he shouldn't have been fighting Tim Sylvia. He should have been fighting Mir Carwin, and JDS, all guys that weren't ranked at the time. Mir obviously
Yeah.
was in theory, but he was coming off of his motorcycle injury, so he was
Mm-hmm.
not ranked in the top 10, which
Yeah.
is why Tim Sylvia and Nogueira fought for the interim title at
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
UFC. I don't remember the number, 87 or something like that, but they that was that. When he fought Andrei Arlovsky was the number 2 ranked heavyweight, and even after the loss to Fedor, Tim Sylvia was still, I think, 6 or 7 on the rankings. And then at that point, you started getting Lesnar and stuff mixed in after that, more around the Brett Rogers era. Well, I always hear everybody talk about Brett Rogers, and okay, in hindsight, yeah, but he was on a 4-fight winning streak over a couple really good fighters. John Murphy, who most fans won't know, was considered a good win back in 2009. Bundiga Humphreys was on a brutal KO streak of a couple guys, and he had wins over James Thompson
Mm-hmm.
and Arlovsky, coming off of a win over the number 2 heavyweight in the world, a brutal knockout. Brett Rogers was ranked number 6 in the world. And he was the highest ranked guy that Fedor could fight that wasn't signed to the UFC. On top of that, at that whole time, 8 of the top 10 across the board were generally all Strike Force fighters or guys fighting in K1. Like Overeem was Krokop at that point had been cut from the UFC, and he was fighting some guys in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all rewritten history. I'm sorry, but if you listen to Dana White, you lose credibility as a thinking fan. To hear Dana White say he never thought Fedor was one of the greatest of all time, but in the same
Just a
breath
hater.
say that he
Yeah.
flew him out to an island on a private jet and offered him the biggest contract in UFC history. Do you think that he would honestly do that for somebody that he didn't think was going to be any good? Why would he insist on an 8-fight contract if he thought the guy was going to lose one fight and he was going to cut him?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to just use your brain, folks. If you listen to that guy, I've said it before on the show. He's the biggest liar in the history of the sport. He's done a lot of good for the sport, but he's a liar. He's a wife beater.
And yes,
That's what he is.
he's a wife beater. And the other thing is too is of course he had to talk about the slap nuts fighting whatever the fuck it's called. And he said that so of course, like you said, the internet it's out there for everyone to see. So he said that on the slap nuts shit is the target audience is obviously TikTok, and he said that they had 10 million views on TikTok, and then somebody posted the slap fighting profile page that shows you their numbers. He's
The
like,
interactions,
they had 10 million views, and they're like, no, that's 8.7, that's not 10. So like but that's his job as a promoter to pump things up. But that's the difference between his kind of promotion and what Scott Coker does. And as much as like people like to ask, and people ask Scott Coker like UFC opinions and stuff like that, and he always has the same answer. I'm not worried about what they're doing. I'm worried about what I'm doing. I'm trying to keep business going over here, and I think that's the way to be, which is why I mean, I lately I actually just put it on Twitter recently because one of the last, it wasn't even a question at the they had their UFC event that in the middle of the night on the night of Bellator 290. So at the end of that press conference, it wasn't even a question, but someone that was there as media in the crowd just congratulated Dana White on what a good job he's doing as a promoter. Didn't even have a question for him. And that right there is kind of like, I'm just like, you know what, man? I think that's why, and I put it on Twitter because that bothered me. I said, this is why I prefer to cover Bellator and all the work I do with Spectation Sports, you know, regional events, grappling, one championship. I prefer to just do all of that. Everyone else is covering the UFC, so what the hell do you need me to regurgitate 100 times the same bullshit? But anyway, that's enough about Fedor. I think we need to give Mr. Eblin some props too for the win that he picked up. I mean, first of all, it was on CBS, that card. Everybody saw it, including the old lady I work with, who was just like, she even said to me, "There was fights on Saturday. Did you know that?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I knew that," because she ran into him. So if this random old fuddy duddy and her husband watched some MMA, that's because being on CBS was a good thing. They pulled in over 1 million viewers, 1.09 or 8, something like that, are the final numbers from bringing Bellator MMA back to CBS. And Johnny Evelyn got to do his thing, make his title defense against somebody that was supposed to beat him.
It was close. I mean, as far as the
Mm-hmm.
odds went,
Mm-hmm.
started off close. I had Tokov winning the first round. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You
No, I
know
agree.
what everybody else thought, but and I thought the second round was even close, but I gave it to Eblin based off. I think at the end, I think he kind of did
Mm-hmm.
some stuff that swung that one,
Especially, yeah, especially at the end.
and then from that point on, it was the Eblin show. So, yeah, I think he's good. I think he potentially poses some problems for the stylistically for some of the
Mm-hmm.
best middleweights in the world. I think he's a little too green for some of them at this point. But he's only got 13 fights now. So and I think he's a couple, maybe 2 more years in Bellator, four more fights, 5 more fights, and maybe his contract runs out and he gets a chance to go after some of those the Adesanyas and those guys. But his wrestling is pretty impressive. I think he's got to tune up his striking a little bit. He got his eye caught early and busted open in the first
Mm-hmm.
round, which can happen to anybody. But if that happens against a more potent striker and your vision starts to go, it could potentially obviously lead to 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 demise. But impressive.
Mm.
We didn't do picks for this. It would have been, Tokov's Team Fedor, me and my Homer picks would have been, but again, he was one of those guys where you're like, he's probably going to win the fight. He
Mm-hmm.
stylistically, when you're that good of a wrestler and you're able to control your opponents, as the fight grinds on, it's such an advantage. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, overall, like you said, the event was generally I'm not a fan of like that many decision fights, but I don't know. There's something about it being on CBS. I hope with the ratings that they got, they do it maybe do it quarterly, 4 times a year, if you have to do the stuff with Showtime. I'm not sure why they're not on CBS regularly. I feel like that'd be profitable and better. But
I,
because what?
I'd like to see him maybe twice a year right now because
Mhm,
I feel like you don't want to water it down
mhm,
and bore that crowd with like kind of your average Bellator card. Not to
mhm.
bash Bellator, like I think like that should be saved for like the Grand Prix finals,
Mhm.
um, stuff
Yeah.
like that, where you have like where it's a where it really means something, not
Mhm.
just you know. Uh, Golem versus James or something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
it,
You
it
want to
needs
make sure
it needs
it's
to be, and I'd like to see now with Fedor moved on. I would love to see Bellator really focus on that generation that they created.
Mhm.
Um, the McKees, the Pitbulls. Like Pitbull should be featured on CBS. Like he's
Yeah,
earned
yeah.
that right.
Well,
Eh,
yeah. Yeah, that's definitely like I think that was kind of the idea with putting the co-main event because you had their homegrown, middleweights fighting each other, and then they had the legends, with Ryan Bader, the current heavyweight champion, who's you know from the UFC. Like it was definitely it's a nice setup to kind of say here this is our product, and we got a lot of good fights to show you. I mean, if you didn't watch the prelims, I mean, Lorenz Larkin's knockout was that was a highlight reel. Yeah.
No, that and then the Brennan Ward Homasi fight delivered
And that
exactly
that
what
was
they
yeah,
expected. Those back to back. It's a shame that we didn't get Larkin on the main card, and that's what I
yeah,
said earlier this week. Is like if I had one thing to change or one thing that
hmm
for Lorenz Larkin is he should never be on a prelim again.
yeah,
That guy should always be on the main card.
yeah,
There's just too much potential. It's like putting Paul Daly on a prelim. Like there's just too much
yeah.
potential for that
That highlight reel
that
that gets
highlight
yeah.
reel, yeah, that blows up the internet. And I mean, had you had that and the Ward
Hmm.
fight back to back, like
Oh
it
yeah,
seems to me like you would have had a lot of chatter going on online, and you maybe that 1 point, one goes to
Mhm.
1 point,
Yeah,
25 or
yeah,
1.3, so. And that's where I think they dropped the ball not having that big intro. I mean, we joke about Ariel Hawani and stuff, but he nailed it with the idea, the Pride
yeah.
style
I
intro.
don't
And
like to give him credit for much, but when I saw that clip too, when he sold that idea to Coker, and Coker even called it a $3 million idea, I mean, it definitely would have worked. I mean, but it was still nice to see the again that photo up. I mean, I downloaded it. I'm actually I don't know what to make the cover for this podcast episode, whether it be that photo or the UFC 284 because we're gonna close off with the 284 picks. But I mean that photos that I mean it's already the desktop. You know, it's going to be my desktop background because that's pretty much like
It's
when you start.
iconic.
Yeah.
It's the guy. It's the people that made us want to watch this sport. Without that room of
Mm-hmm.
fighters, I'm not watching MMA today.
Yeah.
It's true. It's just the truth.
Yeah, and it included. I mean, you name it: Hoist Gracie, Matt Hughes, Couture,
Henzo,
Rampage.
Couture,
Yeah.
Barnett, Fedor, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
Coleman, um, Frank Shamrock. Uh, it was unbelievable, and just to know that there were certain people that were left in the crowd. I mean, you had
Yeah.
Chris Cyborg. Now, guys, yeah, she's a little bit the next kind of era up as far as kind of starting in like
But
2007
again,
ish.
those were people that reached out to Coker and were like,
Uh
"Yeah,
huh.
I want to be there. Like, how do you make it so I can be there?"
Hmm.
Crow Cop was one of the ones that wanted to be there because he actually wanted to like be there and present with Flower. I mean, which would have been something, but they couldn't get the travel and stuff together. But he mentioned that in the post fight press conference. So
I
I think he deserves a pat on the back for making that happen the way that it happened. It sucks that we couldn't get it earlier because of COVID and stuff. Because I know this was planned. But and the other thing too about the people want to talk about matching Bader and Fedor again, for the second time, but it was Fedor that kept asking for it. They presented him other fights, and Fedor was the one that he
Yeah.
just wanted to see. And that's what all these fighters have to suffer from the same thing. They want to see if they still got it against the best in the world. So,
Yeah, no, and that was one of the things
hmm
I talked about was in my world, I wish that wouldn't have been the fight, but you
hmm
can't. If fighter wants that, that's what you got to get. One of the disappointing news to kind of come out was hearing that it was offered to Anderson Silva and he turned it
yeah,
down to fight Jake Paul, and that obviously didn't work out well for him
hmm
either, other than the amount of money he made.
hmm
So, I mean, there was some potential there. I'd like to see Ryzen do a not have Fedor fight because I would prefer Fedor
yeah,
never fight again. I'd like to see them do a it would be cool to see a ceremony in Japan for him though, where guys like Crow Cop and some of those other guys
yeah.
maybe could
Next
some of the
Rising event,
Japanese
yeah,
fighters that were the Ogawas and some of the guys he fought in Japan,
yeah,
maybe Takada and those guys, let them kind of do their same kind of farewell to him
yeah.
in a ceremony or um and I'd like to see him become an ambassador for the sport. I know he doesn't speak a
Well,
lot of English, but just
yeah,
his
but that's actually so. Like even Coker said in the post-fight press conference, he's like, he doesn't want to stop working with him. He wants him to do ambassador type stuff, come to events, and kind of let's just like, do media and just, be like just to because he said something about the history of the because this young sport because it's only 30 years or close to 30 years old. So he's like, there's history that needs to be like earmarked, and guys like Fedor are part of the symbols of it, and so he definitely wants to have him still do stuff. So you got your wish there for sure.
I'd like to see Bellator do something like like the NBA has their logo,
hmm
Jerry West logo. How about Bellator changing their logo and it being like a silhouette of Fedor or something like that? You know
hmm
what I mean? Like you used to have the gladiator guy, but maybe I don't know. Something like that would just be so cool because it would really lock him in as for all time and eternity as somebody who had such reverence and everybody. I mean, the only person to ever really have bad things to say about Fedor was Dana White, and that he had, his was money pushing his opinion. He doesn't really believe that. If you had Dana White on Truth Serum and sat him in a room, he would say he watched him fight every fight he ever fought, and he was one of
yeah,
his favorite fight. You know what I mean? He said it
yeah,
before. He said it while he was trying to get him. When you catch him in the truth, um, and that's where we're at. But yeah, a great career, fun event, and I think I, Bellator's not going to get weaker because of the show. Um, I do think that they need to get back to their pre-pandemic kind
hmm
of fighter, like the meet and greets, the Dave and Buster parties, that
yeah.
kind of stuff. I think that helps bring fans in and helps really fill out that last 20%
Mm.
of the arena, which I've noticed has been kind of lacking as far as attendance for since the pandemic and the reopening of their live shows. So, um, but that's that.
Yeah.
We obviously want to jump into 284. I guess really quickly, some other news. It looks like we're going to get Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler,
Mm-hmm.
Ultimate Fighter coaches. Um, I would have been more excited about this fight like 2 years ago when Chandler first came to the UFC, but we're going to get it now. It'll be a great fight, a fun fight to
Well,
watch.
not now, but it's definitely. I'm actually. I like the news. I think it's the perfect time for both men. With McGregor coming off the injury and the loss, Chandler coming off a loss, and he's at a point in his career where he's got to think about his future. So it's a big money fight for him. He definitely deserves the payday, win or lose. But if I'm looking at the matchup, I mean, on it, not for nothing, the type of fighter that Chandler is with the wrestling base, I think McGregor kind of has a good track record against when you look at when he fought like Chad Mendes and guys that have that similar style. McGregor does have a positive in his history with dealing folks like that, but when he beat those guys that were like that, he wasn't the $1 million man that he is. And that saying about the silk pajamas and getting up in the morning to do your work or whatever. So Chandler is still that guy that likes to grind, work out. Like you watch any of his training videos, you get sore watching him train. That's how Michael Chandler trains. I think I love the matchup, but if I'm given talk about folks that have a dog in them and like the edge goes to Chandler just for the mere fact that he still wants to win more than get paid.
Yeah, I think so. I think that I give the slight favor to McGregor based off the fact that I think his crisp strike, like if we get any kind of vintage
yeah.
McGregor, his straight punch I think is going to cause
Mm-hmm.
Chandler heavy problems.
Yeah.
The issue with McGregor has been since kind of the I guess post Habib, he's the Poirier fights primarily.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of accepted taking punishment. Like
Mm.
and I think that you can't do that against Chandler. I think
Yeah.
Chandler's going to be like you mentioned the bulldog. He's going to be in your face,
Mm-hmm.
and unless McGregor is able to annihilate him early, like he did something like Eddie Alvarez,
Yeah.
I think that
That's a really good
he's
example.
gonna take punishment that he used to not take, and I don't think McGregor reacts as well to punishment as a lot of guys. I mean, Chandler even kind of folds up a little bit, but it's usually after taking like brain damage kind of beat down,
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
McGregor seems to fold sooner. McGregor seems to fold for me at the first sight of blood, the first
Mm-hmm.
big punch. All of a sudden, he's
Yeah.
backing off and slowing up. So I
Whereas Michael Chandler's like fucking Brad Pitt in Fight Club,
yeah, he's like,
leaning on dudes. Yeah.
I'll just eat your glove, but I'm gonna
Yeah.
eventually go unconscious,
Yeah.
So, but fun fight. Sounds like the Ultimate Fighters might have a fun uh theme. Or older fighters that were cut from the UFC coming back to fight a
Yeah.
newer generation.
So.
Add a little bit of flavor if we get some good names in there.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with the lightweight division apparently being involved. So you could get some dudes that don't like McGregor, some guys that, maybe even don't like Chandler. Maybe they get some
Yeah.
guys, from Bellator. Maybe we get Will Brooks back in there. I mean, there's some guys that could potentially.
That would be that'd be strange, but yeah, that actually would be cool too.
I mean, could
Like,
you imagine Will Brooks training on
uh,
McGregor's team against Chandler, who he beat twice
yeah.
for the Bellator lightweight title in Bellator? I mean, there's some potential for some storylines that could kind of
Yeah,
revive
and I
the
think it's going to be on regular ESPN too, so everyone can watch it because it's because McGregor's involved. I feel like I saw that somewhere.
be
I'm not.
smart. It
Yeah,
would
it
be
would be
smart.
smart instead of putting it behind their fucking Disney
Another
paywall.
paywall. Yeah.
But
So
the one other thing I want to say before we look at 284, as far as that matchup goes, is the other thing too is um the McGregor's, to your point about his striking and stuff. He's also got that weird for his frame, his reach. He's got an ungodly, he always seems to have a reach advantage no matter who he fights for his size. And like you said, the way if it comes to that first clash in the round one, and McGregor's timing, he could nail Chandler and damage that nose further than it's already damaged. I was watching some interviews with him on ESPN, and it already looks like there's no bridge there
yeah,
from all his from fighting Gaethje and everyone else he's fought. So
everybody. Yeah.
yeah, So I don't know. It should be fun, but there is that thing about USADA. McGregor has to be in the USADA testing pool for a certain amount of time. So I'm calling either July for International Fight Week for that, or probably November Madison Square Garden, because if McGregor's on the marquee, if they want to come big either at T-Mobile or MSG. So
Yeah, it all depends on when he officially went into the pool, because they
mhm.
said 6 months, but they can bypass all that. I have a
Yeah, it's,
feeling
it's
this
all
happened.
it's all mob shit anyway.
And I mean, I think you'd have to be blind not to see
Yeah.
that McGregor's clearly been taking drugs for the last year. So let's not put the chances of him testing positive for you know, we learned about the whole picogram thing already. So
Yeah,
apparently, you
he'll
could
get an
you could
exemption.
take steroids 10 years ago and still have
Yeah,
picograms, according
yeah.
to John Jones. So, anyways, it'll be fun to talk about that. Obviously, as the Ultimate Fighter starts, and
So
I'm kind of excited about the prospect of having an exciting reason to watch that show. So, um, yeah, so we'll get into that. But this weekend we get into UFC 284. I feel me just mentioning it is already more than the UFC has done in the last couple weeks. Um, they're pound for pound 1 versus 2. Volkanovski versus Makhachev. Um,
you even though you fucked up his name, you still did a better job than Dana White, because at least he tried to.
Makachev,
Makachev.
Makachev. Um,
But I don't know, man. This card again, I feel like they could do a better job of advertising it. Maybe they're putting too much money into slap nuts, but it is the
it's
it's the
it's one great fight, one good fight, really good fight, and 3 prelims on the main card is basically.
but the main event is really the reason to watch, because it's champ versus champ for I'm surprised there's no odds up on the UFC website.
Well, they probably don't know who's fighting. um, so
So
yeah, it's like you said, this card's clearly being carried by the main event.
mhm.
The pay
Yes,
per view,
really quick, just because this fight right here on the Fight Pass prelims, Loma Luke Bunmi versus Elise Reed. I feel like that hasn't been mentioned enough. It's a Muay Thai, striker versus former CFFC champ that our girl Jillian DeCourcy fought for the title on short notice. So, like, that's a fight people are sleeping on, that's going to be on the early prelims, that I feel like folks should watch. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of the fights that are like close for a fight of the night contender. There, look at the odds are the minus 280 for Loma, and plus 235 for Reed. Just something to put an earmark on if you're somebody looking at. She's actually the favorite, Loma. I thought she'd be the underdog. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on if you're looking at the other fights on the card. As I was doing my quick homework for get ready to do the podcast today. So I guess we might as well start with the opener with Jimmy Crute and Alonzo Manifold.
Yeah, Crute comes in ranked number 12. Menifield's not ranked, but coming off of a couple good beat downs. One beat against a guy who had a fake record and eventually tested positive for steroids.
Oh, that's that guy, yeah, that we talked to Jay about, yeah.
Yeah. I am going with Menafield though. Or Menafield. I feel like he packs a big enough punch where he'll catch Crute and finish him. Um, Crute's kind of had some up and down success, although his losses were to Anthony Smith and Jamal Hill his last fight. He took punches in both of those fights, and that's how he was. Well, he had a leg injury against Anthony Smith, but I have a feeling that Menafield will land a hard punch and do some damage. Although it's in Australia and Crute's Australian, so
Do
that
you think
obvious.
that's why they have Minifield as an underdog?
No, I think Crute probably to the betting public is more known, but And I could be way wrong. I it's one of these fights to me. It's kind of a coin flip despite the odds, and I think Menifield will just land something
Yeah, I think
to
so
do some
too.
damage.
And then we're looking at Justin Tafa versus Parker Porter.
Yeah, a fight kind of moved to the main card late as Junior Tafa's fight was pulled due to him suffering an injury. Um, I think this is I think this is kind of their Hamasi Ward fight
Mm.
essentially. Um, Pretty much just probably going to get a couple bangers. I'm going to go with Toffa to land a big shot and win by knockout. I don't think that they would put him on the main card if the UFC didn't think that.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have odds on this one? I mean, am I way off here too? No, they got it's almost a coin flip, minus 140, plus
For
120.
Tafa, yeah.
So it's pretty even. But I'll go with the New Zealander here to again probably start. Hopefully, well, as a fan, hopefully start the night off with the second KO
Mm.
the main card and kind of make it worth the money to as opposed to some drawn out laboring heavyweight fight.
And then this fight, I have no I don't understand. Uh, Jack Della Maddalena versus Randy Brown. Um, I'm not sure why this is
I mean, it's
on
the
the
third
main.
best fight on paper. Madalena's on a long win streak. He lost his first two pro fights, so he's won his last 13. Randy
Hmm.
Brown's on like a 4-fight win streak, including
I
a
feel like this
nice.
would have been better as the lead in from ESPN though.
There's just no depth to the card. I mean,
Yeah.
you just it's kind of what it is. I'm gonna go with I'm picking Madalena to win by decision. Randy
Mm-hmm.
Brown obviously is on a nice little streak himself. He had the one armed rear naked choke against Cowboy Oliveira
Mm-hmm.
on the Jacksonville out of pandemic first show 261. Um, and he's been successful, but 13 fight win streak. Seems like he found his way after losing his first two fights. So I'll go with him. But really, these are all just kind of get your beers cold and
Yeah.
get your food on the grill fights to get ready for the last two of the night.
Yeah, I'm going Randy Brown on this one. I feel like he could pull off a decision. Yair, is this the co-main event? Yeah, right. Yair Rodriguez, who fights as often as Haley's comet passes the Earth, is facing Josh Emmett, and I mean, I normally because I'm Mexican, I root for the Mexican guy, but I just want Josh Emmett to win because I'm bothered by the infrequency of Rodriguez's. I hear he's I know he got mouthy with Michael Bisping once, and I mean, I know Yair Rodriguez is probably going to win. What are the odds here? They have him as a favorite,
It's
minus
close.
165. Yeah.
I picked Emmett the other day, and I'm going to stick with that pick.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think he's going to kind of bulldog his way in, kind of Chandler style, and I think that if you can get in tight, now he's going to have to go through the leg kicks. He's going to have to get through the length of Yair, but if he's able to get in and kind of force his way in, I
Mm-hmm.
think he can do a lot of damage from the inside. While his wrestling is not necessarily something we always see, a little bit of a mystery. Although we hear he's a good wrestler, I think that that's there, and I for me, Yair, when he loses, like I've always feel like we've seen him fold a little bit, So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and the Frankie Edgar fight always pops into my head. So
Yep.
in my mind, if I'm Josh Emmett, I'm thinking like I need to get on the inside. I need to rough him up a little bit, maybe do some dirty boxing up against
Yeah.
the cage,
Pressure. Yeah.
and get him down to the ground and get him out of his realm because he can't hit you with a spinning back elbow or a spinning back kick or any of that stuff when you're obviously on the ground. So that's kind of where I'm going with it. I think it is a coin flip fight. I like the odds. I think Yair is the fair favorite, slight
Mm-hmm.
favorite, based off of maybe skill sets,
Yeah.
and flashiness that obviously the betting public likes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he has more. His wins have been more high profile.
Yeah.
That zombie win is enough
Mm-hmm.
to be a highlight reel for all time and eternity. So, but I think Emmett wins. I also think it wins because it just this whole thing being an interim title. I understand it with the Volkanovski situation, but I w- you know I just think Emmett will go down kind of as like one of the Dave Monets, kind of a strange,
Mm-hmm.
champion. And I don't necessarily think he has a long run there. I think if he runs
You're
into
picking Emmett
Volkanovski,
too, right?
I'm
You're
going to pick
doing it.
Emmett. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right. No, I just want to make. I'm making my notes as to if I'm going to put any money down. I'm looking at the most interesting ones, and then we have our main event, which I talked to Trevor Peak for Spectation Sports last week, and we talked about this fight, and listening to him, and I mean, my pick is going to be Makachev simply because I know Volkanovski brought in Craig Jones to like train his like defense for submission defense, but it's not the same kind of grappling, if that makes sense to anybody out there. Like the way these Dagestani guys grapple, it's not like jujitsu guys, which is what Craig Jones is. So I feel like that's not that maybe it'll help him defend against the kind of submission someone like Greg Jones is, but I don't think that's what Makachev brings to the table. He brings the Khabib blueprint, which is just brutality and like
Relentlessness
yeah.
and all, and yeah, and then when you bring the punching and stuff, Craig Jones is obviously
Yeah.
the ankle lock and all that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'm picking Islam as well to win by destruction.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's just going to be too big. I think he's just going to be able to get the takedowns, and I think he'll be able to be aggressive and I don't, it's hard to say a finish just
Mm-hmm.
because um, there's too much respect for both guys. But I
Yeah.
think Volkanovski takes one on the chin here, and I think he goes back probably to 145, and
But
eventually maybe gets another super fight with Aljamain Sterling if Sterling picks up another win. As the bigger guy in that
mhm.
situation, or at least the even. Sterling's a big bantamweight, but
That's an interesting stat here on the UFC website. They have the significant strikes um, with Makachev being the leader. You would think with striking, that's where Volkanovski has the edge, but not by their number.
I just think
I don't.
ground strikes mean significant strikes when Magachev takes a guy down and
Mm,
has a flawless victory and hits him
yeah,
1,000 times.
that makes sense too. Yeah.
Bobby Green kind of quick win thing. But no, I mean, I think it's an outstanding fight. I think I would have I would have preferred Volkanovski maybe hold off, like I said, and wait for Sterling as that super fight and let Islam kind of marinate as the lightweight champion and
Hmm.
see what he can do in that division. If Volkanovski wins, we end up with a double champ situation, which is fun for a day or two, but then it kind of throws a monkey wrench into everything. I guess that's the nice thing about having the interim title.
Hmm.
Maybe Volkanovski just a classy move would be to take the champ photos and then kind of relinquish the featherweight title that night and
Hmm.
just go, hey, the guy who just won the fight prior to me, congratulations on being the new featherweight champion of the world. I'll be back to get it from you, at a later date or something like that.
Hmm.
Something like that would be cool because otherwise we're holding up divisions and
Yeah,
nobody wants
yeah.
to see a bunch of interim title fights while the champ is being active but kind of in another division. At least I don't want to see that. Not gonna speak for anybody else, but yeah, I mean, it's ESPN Plus pay per view. Fans by now have either figured out how to get it or never will pay for it. So,
Yeah.
um, you know, but it's UFC pay per view, and
Yeah, usually, I mean, for when it comes to MMA combat sports and these events around the weekend, they draw the eyeballs, and we'll be watching. So, I guess that's it. Next week we hope to have a guest on. I have to work out the timing. So, again, my apologies for no podcast last week. Again, I lost the COVID lottery and finally got hit with the bug that's been getting everybody. And here I am. I'm pulled through with my throat a little congested, but a little tired and missing jujitsu for 2 weeks. But other than that, I'm ready to get back rolling with the podcast and jujitsu and everything else.
no, glad to have you back, and just taking last week off just saved me a bunch of embarrassing Bellator picks. So, um, fans can check out the show at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast to Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Follow me, Matthew Hawkins, at MMA Hawk 21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter, Carbeerzol on Instagram, and Old Head Carb on Twitch. And as always, you can watch our video podcast at allaccessmma.com. Check out allaccessmma.com for our video podcast, MMA news, and MMA stories. Ed, I enjoyed talking to you this weekend, and we'll find out who the number one pound for pound in the UFC is by early Sunday morning your time.
Peace.